For 3 years, Captain Maya Carson had been a prisoner, though not in the traditional sense. She had been held on the Zorathian flagship, far from Earth, as part of a diplomatic mission gone wrong. A simple misunderstanding in the midst of peace talks had led to her capture. She had no idea that years later, her life would take a turn no one could have predicted. The Zorathians were an ancient, honorable race, bound by strict codes. Their way of life was built on loyalty and respect, values that were ingrained in every aspect of their culture. When Maya had first arrived aboard their ship, she had expected to be treated as a captive, perhaps locked away in a dark, cold cell waiting for her fate to unfold. Instead, she was given a comfortable room, allowed to wander within the ship's limits, and treated with a strange sense of courtesy that seemed almost alien to her. The reason for this unexpected kindness, she soon learned, was their leader, Commander Rickler. Rickler was a towering figure among his people. Known for his strength in battle and his unyielding adherence to the Zorathian code, he had spared Maya's life not out of pity or mercy, but out of respect for her as a human being. The Zorathians believed that no one should be forced into submission without cause, and Rickler believed that Maya's intelligence and courage were worthy of acknowledgement at first. Maya had found it difficult to understand their ways. The Zorathians were a proud people, their history filled with stories of conquest and glory. They had never once been defeated in battle, and their advanced technology was unmatched across the galaxy. But they were also a people who valued honor above all else. They had no interest in subjugating her or forcing her to conform. Instead, they offered her the chance to earn her freedom, but on their terms, through a test of character, not combat. For Rickler, it was a strange decision. He had never met a human before, and he was fascinated by their resilience. Maya had no weapons, no advanced technology to speak of. She was just a human woman, far from home. And yet she stood before him with the quiet confidence of someone who had already faced many battles. Her determination was what caught his eye, not her ability to fight, but her ability to think, to adapt, to survive. 3 years had passed since that first meeting. Maya had become a figure of respect among the Zorathians, not through force or violence, but through her intellect and her courage. She had spent those years studying their ways, learning their language, and, in the process, earning their admiration. Her reputation grew. She found herself in discussions with the Zorathian leadership about matters far more important than her own personal freedom. They sought her advice on diplomacy, tactics, and even culture. It was an unexpected turn for someone who had once been considered an enemy. Despite the respect that had grown between Maya and Rickler, there was always an invisible barrier between them. Rickler, bound by his code of honor, refused to let their relationship go beyond simple friendship. The Zorathian laws were strict. No physical intimacy could take place unless it was earned through trust and trust. For Rickler took years to build. He had made a vow not to touch Maya, not to claim her as his own, until she had earned it. And so, for 3 years, they had lived in a quiet, respectful partnership, one without physical closeness. Maya, for her part, had never pressed him. She had grown to understand his culture, to respect it. She had no intention of forcing him into a decision that went against everything he believed in. But the silence between them had begun to weigh on her. In the quiet moments, she would catch herself wondering if there was more to their bond than simple respect. She had never once considered Rickler to be a threat. In fact, she had come to admire him as much as she respected his code. He was strong, yes, but he was also thoughtful and kind in ways she hadn't expected from someone of his status. One evening, as the ship sailed through the vast expanse of space, Maya found herself once again standing before Rickler in the large observation room. The stars outside glimmered like diamonds, and the hum of the ship's engines was the only sound that filled the silence between them. "Rickler," she began, her voice breaking the stillness. "Do you ever think about Earth? About the people we left behind?" He turned his head slightly to meet her gaze. His eyes, usually so cold and calculating, softened ever so slightly. "I do," he said quietly. "Your people are ... unique. It is difficult to understand." How such a fragile species can survive in a universe so vast and unforgiving. Maya smiled. We've had to learn the hard way. But we're survivors. You are not just survivors, Reichler replied, his tone serious. You are resilient. You find a way, no matter the odds. They stood there for a long moment, the stars beyond them filling the space with a sense of wonder. Maya could feel the weight of his words, the sincerity in them. She had never truly realized just how much she had grown to depend on Reichler, to trust him, even though he had never once touched her. In a way, it was that very restraint that had made her respect him even more. But tonight, something felt different. There was an intensity in the air that hadn't been there before. The quiet tension between them, the unspoken feelings, seemed to grow stronger with every passing second. I've come to respect you, Reichler, Maya said, her voice soft but steady. More than you may realize. Not just because of your strength, but because of your honor, your ability to see beyond yourself. It's something I didn't expect to find among the Zorathians. He was silent for a moment, his gaze fixed on the stars, as if he were weighing her words carefully. Then, in a voice that was almost too quiet to hear, he spoke. I've never broken my code, Maya, he said, his words thick with meaning. Not once. And yet, there is something about you, something that makes me question everything I have ever known. Maya's heart skipped a beat. For a moment, it felt like the entire universe had gone silent, as if even the stars themselves were holding their breath. Reichler finally turned to face her fully. His eyes, usually so distant, were now filled with something she couldn't quite place, something more than just respect. More than just the bond they had built over the years. It was a look of ... longing. I have made a vow, he said, his voice low, and I have kept it. But I cannot deny what I feel anymore. I cannot pretend that I do not care for you, Maya. The words hung in the air like a declaration. For the first time in 3 years, Maya felt the weight of their connection shift. It wasn't just a partnership anymore. It wasn't just respect. There was something more. Something deeper. And for the first time, she felt a strange warmth fill her chest. Reichler had never touched her. But tonight, the barrier between them was beginning to crack. The next few days passed in a quiet haze, for Maya. Reichler had kept his distance, as he always did. But there was something different in the way he looked at her now. The weight of his words from the observation room lingered in her mind. She could feel the tension between them growing, thickening the air around her. It wasn't just the usual politeness that had defined their interactions for the last 3 years. It was something deeper, something that neither of them was ready to fully confront yet. The Zorathian Empire was in the midst of a crisis. A dark shadow loomed over the galaxy, and the Zorothians, despite their unmatched military strength, were struggling to fight off an unknown enemy. Maya had overheard hushed conversations among the officers and commanders aboard the ship. No one seemed to know exactly who the enemy was, only that their attacks were swift and devastating. The Zorathians were being pushed to the brink, and the once mighty empire now seemed vulnerable in a way that was both terrifying and unfamiliar. Despite being a prisoner, Maya had a unique advantage, her human ingenuity. The Zorathians had always prided themselves on their technology and strength, but it was their overconfidence that had left them unprepared for the new threat. Maya had spent her days studying their fleet, observing their tactics, and thinking of ways to turn the tide in their favor. She had never been one to sit back and wait for someone else to solve the problem. Even if that someone else was an alien race, it was on the 5th day after Reichler's confession that Maya was summoned to the war room. The Zorothian commanders had called a meeting to discuss their next steps. Maya knew that they had run out of options, and it seemed as though they were finally ready to listen to her. When she entered the room, the atmosphere was thick with tension. The commanders were seated around a large table, their expressions grim. Reichler stood at the head of the table, his posture straight and commanding. He didn't look at her when she entered, but she could feel his presence, his eyes following her every move. Captain Carson Reichler began, his voice calm but carrying the weight of authority. We have reached the point where our tactics are failing. We are being attacked by an enemy we cannot understand. I have heard whispers of your suggestions, but I will hear them from your own mouth. Maya stood before the table, her heart pounding in her chest. This was the moment she had been waiting for. The moment where she could prove that humanity's greatest strength wasn't just in their ability to fight, but in their ability to think, adapt, and create. "I've been observing your tactics," Maya began, her voice steady. "You're fighting a battle without fully understanding your enemy. The Zorathians are strong, but your pride has led you to overlook the power of unpredictability. Your enemies don't play by the rules, and you're fighting them as if they will. That's why you're losing." There was a murmur of disagreement from some of the commanders, but Reichler raised his hand to silence them. He turned his gaze toward Maya, his eyes piercing, but not unkind. "Then what do you suggest, Captain?" he asked. Maya took a deep breath. "I suggest that you stop relying on brute force alone. You need to think like your enemy, anticipate their moves. They are not here to conquer you directly. They're trying to destabilize you, disrupt your communication, cause confusion, and weaken your resolve." The room fell silent. Maya could see the skepticism in their eyes, but she pressed on. "We need to make them think we're unpredictable. The Zorathians have always been known for their strength, but we can use your greatest asset, your reputation. What if we create an illusion? Make them think you're stronger than you are. Make them question their own strategy." Reichler studied her closely. "An illusion?" "Yes," Maya said, her eyes locked onto his. "We can use your fleet's advanced technology to manipulate their sensors. Create false readings, simulate a larger fleet or more firepower. If they think they're fighting a losing battle, they'll be forced to retreat or make mistakes." For the first time in a long time, Reichler smiled. It was small, almost imperceptible, but Maya caught it. She had won him over. "We will try it your way," he said, his tone softer now. "But understand this, Captain. We do this because we trust your judgment, not because we are desperate." "Understood, Commander. And I trust that when the time comes, you'll be ready to fight with everything you have." The next several hours were spent preparing for the plan. Maya worked closely with the Zorothian engineers, offering her ideas on how to modify their systems to create the illusion she had suggested. They were skeptical at first, but as the engineers worked through the night, they began to see the potential in her strategy. By the time the enemy arrived the next day, the Zorothian fleet was ready. They launched their attack with all the firepower they had, but they also deployed the decoys, fake ships, false readings, and distorted signals that made it appear as though the Zorothian forces were much larger and more formidable than they actually were. It worked. The enemy, unsure of what they were facing, hesitated. In that brief moment of confusion, the Zorothians struck. They used their real strength to push the enemy back, forcing them to retreat in disarray. Maya watched from the command center as the enemy ships vanished from their sensors. Unable to regroup, "We did it," Maya whispered to herself, a sense of triumph filling her chest. Reichler was the first to approach her. "You were right, Captain. Humanity's greatest strength is not in their weapons, but in their minds." Maya turned to him, her heart racing. There was no longer any distance between them. The silent barrier that had kept them apart for so long had finally cracked. The respect they had for each other was evident in the way they stood together, side by side, as equals. "You were willing to listen," Maya said, her voice filled with quiet gratitude, "and that makes all the difference." Reichler nodded, his gaze softening. "I may have underestimated humanity, but I will not make that mistake again." The battle was over, but Maya knew that this was only the beginning. There would be more challenges ahead, more battles to fight. But for the first time in years, she felt a sense of hope. They had won not through violence, but through intellect, teamwork, and the strength of their bond. As she stood beside Reichler looking out at the stars, she realized that their partnership was more than just a matter of survival. It was a new way forward, a way that embraced both their strengths, their differences, and the shared vision of a better future. The victory over the unknown enemy had given the Zorothian Empire a much-needed breath of relief, but it had also left behind a deeper realization. The old ways of relying solely on strength and tradition were no longer enough. The galaxy had changed, and so too must the Zorothians. Maya Carson's unique perspective had brought them victory. But it also sparked a shift in how they viewed themselves, their allies, and even their enemies. In the days following the battle, the atmosphere aboard the flagship had changed. Maya was no longer seen just as a prisoner, but as a respected advisor. Her contributions to the victory were celebrated. The commanders began seeking her counsel on matters beyond just strategy. They wanted to understand human thinking, how their species managed to survive in such a dangerous universe with so few resources. Maya's status among the Zorothians had risen. But with it came a new challenge, one that she had not anticipated. Reichler, too, was changed. The walls he had so carefully built around himself were beginning to crumble. For 3 years he had kept his distance, following his code of honor to the letter. But now, after their shared triumph, something had shifted in him. His admiration for Maya had deepened into something more, something that he could no longer ignore. But still, the Zorothian code held sway over him. He could not bring himself to break it, not yet. Maya understood this better than anyone. She had spent years observing the Zorothians and their culture, their fierce commitment to honor and the burdens it placed on them. She knew that it would take time for Reichler to reconcile his feelings with his duty. What Maya hadn't expected, however, was how her own feelings had grown. What had begun as respect had transformed into something deeper, a quiet yearning for something more. She had come to care for him, not just as a leader, but as a person. Someone whose strength was matched only by his vulnerability. One evening, as the flagship drifted through the darkness of space, Maya stood alone on the observation deck. The stars seemed closer here, as though they were within reach, offering a sense of peace in the midst of the vastness of space. She could feel the weight of the decisions that lay ahead, not just for her, but for the future of humanity and the Zorathians. Reichler appeared beside her, his tall figure casting a shadow in the soft light of the stars. He said nothing at first, simply standing next to her, as if both of them were taking in the vast silence that surrounded them. "I've been thinking," Maya said finally, breaking the silence, "about everything that's happened. The battle, the decisions we've made. About the future." Reichler turned to her, his gaze unreadable. "And what have you concluded, Captain?" Maya hesitated for a moment before speaking. "That there is more to strength than just power. It's about unity. About understanding the other side. We've shown that humanity's greatest strength isn't in weapons, but in our ability to think and adapt. And that's something the Zorathians could learn from." Reichler's eyes softened. "I have always believed that strength is the foundation of an empire. It is why the Zorathians have never been defeated. And yet, you were almost defeated because you didn't expect an enemy to think differently. The universe is full of threats, but it's also full of opportunities. If we stand together, if we unite, we could build something greater than either of our peoples could alone."
Oh.
There was a long pause as Reichler considered her words. "You speak of unity, Captain, but I am bound by the code of my people. The Zorothians are proud of their strength, and to accept your idea of unity, to accept humanity as equals, it is a difficult step for me." Maya turned to face him fully, her expression serious. "I understand. And I'm not asking you to abandon your honor. I just believe that perhaps there's another way, a way that allows both of us to keep what we value most." Reichler's eyes met hers, and for a moment the distance between them seemed to vanish. He took a step closer. "I've never allowed myself to want anything beyond duty, but when I see how you've changed the fate of my people, when I see the courage you carry, even in the face of overwhelming odds, I begin to wonder if my duty might not be to my people alone, but to something greater." Maya felt her heart race at his words. This was the moment she had been waiting for, though she hadn't known it until now. The walls he had built, the barriers of tradition, were finally beginning to fall. "I don't expect you to change overnight, Reichler," Maya said softly. "But the world is changing. The galaxy is changing. Maybe it's time for the Zorothians to change, too." They stood there together, watching the stars, knowing that the future would not be easy, but it would be worth it. The Zorothians had shown their strength, and humanity had shown its resilience. But it was the partnership between the two, the understanding they had forged, It would be their greatest asset. Over the next few weeks, the Zorathian Empire began to change. Reichler, once steadfast in his beliefs, began to push for a new direction, one that involved cooperation with humanity. It was a slow process, but the seeds of unity were being planted. Maya continued to advise them, her reputation growing even further and slowly. The Zorothian leadership began to see the truth in her words. The most significant change came when Reichler stood before the Zorothian Council and made a historic speech. He spoke of strength, but not just the strength of the body or the fleet. He spoke of the strength of the mind, the heart, and the will to understand one another. Humanity has shown us that we are not alone in the universe, he said, his voice carrying through the hall. We are not just conquerors. We are caretakers. We must work together for the future of our people and the galaxy. The Zorathians cannot stand alone. We must stand with humanity as equals. Maya, standing at his side, watched as the council nodded in agreement. There was still resistance, of course, but the majority saw the wisdom in Reichler's words. The alliance between humanity and the Zorothians, once unimaginable, was now beginning to take shape. In the days that followed, the two races worked side by side, sharing knowledge, resources, and strategies. The Zorathians, once so proud and isolated, had begun to open their minds to the possibilities of unity, and humanity in turn learned from the Zorothian strength, adapting their own tactics and technology to become a formidable force in the galaxy. One evening, as they stood together on the observation deck once more, Reichler turned to Maya. "You were right," he said quietly. "It was never about strength alone. It was about understanding, about trust." Maya smiled, her eyes sparkling with the same hope she had felt all those years ago when she first set foot on this ship. "And it's about time we both learned that." As the stars shimmered outside, they stood side by side, knowing that the future was no longer defined by the past. Together, they had forged a new path, a path of unity, respect, and shared strength. The galaxy was vast, but with humanity and the Zorathians working together, there was nothing they couldn't achieve. And as they looked out at the endless expanse of space, Maya realized that this was the beginning of something greater, not just for the Zorothians, not just for humanity, but for the entire galaxy.